Hello everyone and welcome to Guild Wars 2 Daily. Today is another lore episode, so we got lots of cool stuff to talk about today. I'm going to tell you the story of Malkor, which I almost did previously. In fact, I got most of the way through that recording and suddenly realised it was really late, so I cut most of it out. So we'll talk about Malkor. I've got a couple of questions here, and the footage in the background comes from Guild Wars Insider. This is the last one, I believe, of their B-roll footage for me to show, and then we can go and start looking at some other people. Actually, a lot of you have come to me lately and said, particularly with the beta weekend coming up, that I'll have permission to use a lot of your footage. So if it does come to that, thanks to everyone who's offered that for me. And yeah, I suppose we should get started. Before the questions though, I made a big mistake, and not many people pointed it out. I made a big mistake on the last lore episode. We were talking about the Canthan dragons that just kind of live and exist. A few people elaborated on some things, like for instance drakes. Actually, in the real world, we kind of think of drakes as a classification of dragon. I don't think they've ever been described as such within Tyria, so I'm not sure that's 100% valid speculation there to say that they're all dragons, but that is true. There are drakes around the world as well. But one big thing I got wrong was the person asking the question was talking about Shiny. Shiny, I thought, was one of two salt spray dragons that we speak to in quests in the Jade Sea, but that's not actually true. Shiny is a dragon you actually help hatch out of an egg in Nightfall. The egg did come from the Jade Sea, so it's still one of these dragons, but I did get that wrong. That's actually a completely different other dragon that's actually introduced. They do talk in Nightfall about the birth of another new salt spray dragon, one that hasn't, of course, been corrupted by the Jade Wind. So there could be some story there as well. But yeah, that was Shiny. Apologies for that. But now we know. Anyway, the first question for today comes from Full Control, who asked this ages ago, and I almost answered it ages ago, but completely forgot about it after it got cut out of an episode. But it's a really, really cool topic, and it kind of fits in since we're already talking about the Jade Sea. He asks, lore-wise, did we ever kill Kanaxai? If not, whatever happened to him? Do you have any theories? So, in Guild Wars 1 at launch, there wasn't much in the way of end game. There were essentially just 2 god realms and then all the PvP. That's pretty much it. Then there was an update later on which added a new area called Sorry's Furnace, which functioned as the end game until factions came out. ArenaNet knew that they'd kind of dropped the ball slightly by not having some good, elite, difficult content when they released Prophecies. So when they developed factions, they designed 2 very, very challenging, very difficult, really long. They're essentially dungeons. They're the Guild Wars 1 equivalent of dungeons. These were elite missions, a new classification of mission, and actually were 12-man parties, which was a mechanic that they never actually went back to after that. But these were really difficult when they came out. They're much easier now, really easy. But back then, it was very, very difficult. Now, there were 2 of them. One was in the Echovad Forest and dealt with defeating the corrupted spirit of the Echovad Forest known as Urgos, who I've talked about before and can talk about later with regards to pale trees and stuff about the Sylvari and what the actual nature of the Echovad Forest is. But that was kind of the Echovad Forest side. But on the Luxon side, in the Luxon territory, the elite area was called the Deep. And this wasn't to do with something that had been corrupted by the Jade Wind, as so much in factions is. Most of the reason you're fighting is because of the Jade Wind. It's either that the race has become maddened by the Jade Wind, that they are still sane, but they hate humanity for it, so you're fighting them, or in the Naga's case, that many of them died and have really been forced away from their homelands because the sea had frozen over. So all these races were really just attacking you because of the Jade Wind. However, as you're playing through factions and experiencing everything that plot has to offer, every now and then some demons, some mysterious assassins will jump out of nowhere and attack you, and they'll be very, very deadly. You obviously as a hero can beat them, but there's kind of this lore set up that these things, these Oni as they're called, pop out of the shadows, assassinate someone with lightning speed, and then disappear once again. And these were a race that you really didn't know very much about, but you kept encountering them all the way through factions. And you could play the main storyline of factions, encountering the Oni, but never really learning what the hell was going on with them. And that's because it turns out they had nothing to do with the main plot, and they had nothing to do, really, with the Jade Wind either. They're not corrupted, these are just demons. These are related to the story of Kanaxai. So Kanaxai is a demon that Let's rewind factions 200 years before the Jade Winds even hit, right? Kanaxai is a demon that lives in the Jade Sea, and it came to Tyria in a particularly weak area of the world where the mortal realm seems to blend quite closely in with the mists, which we can see a few examples of that happening, like the Door of Kamali, where Varesh tries to summon Abaddon in Nightfall in the Desolation. That's another example of an area, and there are a few of them around. They say that a lot of temples and things are built on these sorts of spots, where Tyria itself is very close to the mist. Now, there's a location like this in a cave underwater. Now, there was a demon in there called Kanaxai, and we don't know 100% whether he was attacking people at this point or not, but when the Jade Wind struck, it didn't necessarily corrupt this demon, but it did freeze the waters over, and he existed in a cave that was under the water, so he was sealed away. He was just sealed in the darkness underneath the Jade, and he could do nothing, and he was stuck down there. Then years and years passed, the Luxons learned how to mine the Jade, and they learned to get magical properties out of the Jade, and so begins the story of a group of people who dig too greedily and too deep. And eventually, they find that the Luxons are getting sick, and they're starting to get corrupted for some reason. This is long after the Jade Wind. This isn't the effect of the Jade Wind corrupting them, it's something else. And they become maddened, and they become outcasts, and they're thrown from society, and they have to be killed by the Luxons. But the deeper people go, the worse this affliction seems to get. And eventually, the Luxons dig their way into an underground cave. So this is actually a cave that existed underwater, but wouldn't have been flooded if the Jade Sea was still liquid, if that makes any sense. When you're in this elite mission, you can press U and look at your mini-map, and you can kind of line that up with the real map that exists on Tyria, and you can line it up and you can kind of see how this cave starts just as you get to land on the surface, and it's really, really cool to be able to look at that. So you can kind of get a feel for where this cave specifically was. But the Luxons went down there, and all they saw was darkness and mist, and out of it came loads of creatures and entities from the mist, nightmares, all kinds of things that you actually end up fighting on your way through that elite mission. And through there, these outcasts actually slowly become more and more corrupt, and these things become the Oni themselves. And it's all this demon in there called Kanaxai that's corrupting them. He begins to spread his fingers, and the Oni spread throughout the world, and the Luxons have got this big problem on their hands. They're in this cave. Kanaxai himself, you do end up defeating in the mission, but as you play through, you learn that he's not any regular demon. He can actually split himself into multiple aspects, and most of the elite mission is you fighting these many aspects of Kanaxai. Eventually, you defeat what you presume to be the final aspect of him, but there's always a question of whether he could come back, and we don't have an answer for this. When you say lore-wise, did we kill Kanaxai? We certainly defeated him. We certainly stopped him with his activities around Cantha, and we certainly stopped the Oni, and I'm not sure whether we cured the outcasts, but nobody is certainly becoming corrupted or afflicted by him any longer. Does that mean that he might not come back later? I don't think that that's for sure. Maybe he's just gone back into waiting in the mist for a while, and in another 250 years, he might try his luck again. And because he's this older, more ancient thing that isn't attributed to the Jade Wind like most other things are, he remains one of the only things in the faction's storyline that we know of that could be a very old entity and could have ties somehow to the Elder Dragons and the storylines that we're going to be experiencing in Guild Wars 2. Because there is a lot of mystery about where he came from, why he was in that cave, why that particular area of the Jade Sea was so weak and so close to the mists, and whether he really is gone, considering he can split himself into many different aspects. He could be back. I could see him coming back. Another big example of a race splitting themselves into multiple aspects, of course, is the Massart. The surviving Massart, Lazarus the Dyer, that's how he survived. He split himself into many aspects that then needed hosts, which were people, which is slightly different and a different story. But yeah, Kanaxai is a very mysterious thing with a really cool story that you can learn quite a lot about and help you understand the Oni, and some interesting stuff to do with factions that I'm hoping that ArenaNet will return to. And I especially hope that they'll return just as much to Kanaxai as I do to Urgos as well, because those two stories were really good. Right, well, I've gone on about that for quite a while, so let's do this story about Malkor. So the other day I was talking about Cormyr, and we were talking about the possible things that might have happened to her and what's been established in the lore that has definitely happened to her. And I was going to segue that into the fact that in Divinity's Reach, there are plazas to all of the gods, right? There are high roads with plazas to statues of the gods. Now, you can go to Cormyr's statue and you can activate it and read scripture about her and her life. But with the other gods, when you activate these statues, you actually get a quote from a man named Malkor, and this was the man that actually sculpted the gods. You might be wondering, how do we know what the gods look like? We heard that the gods brought the humans to Tyria, but then we heard that they abandoned the world after a while, and every continent in Guild Wars 1, all the people there seem to have their own interpretation of what these gods look like. Nobody seems to have a solid understanding of it anymore. Whenever the gods interacted with the humans during Guild Wars 1's time, or since the original Exodus in the year 1, they've always just appeared as avatars rather than their own physical form. So the humans don't actually, or haven't actually seen the gods themselves for a very long time. And you might be wondering, well, why is that? How have we got these statues? How do the people know? And this is the story of Malkor. Essentially, this guy was the sculptor of the gods. When a mortal, or a human in particular, looked upon the gods, they would be blinded by them because of the divine radiance, or some aspect of what it means to be a god. Actually means that if a human or a mortal looks at them, they would be blinded by its brilliance. So the gods needed a way to get across to the human people what they look like, and for this they used Malkor, this sculptor. Now, before this story came out, we'd heard of a place in the world called the Strait of Malkor, which is a region of ocean that you might have seen on maps, and that had been established for a very long time. That name we've known for a very long time, and we've kind of been wondering who was Malkor for a while. It was actually asked in an interview at one point, and we didn't know what we were going to expect, what was going to come out of this, who was Malkor. And we got a very small quote, if I remember, in the first instance, that he was an interesting guy with a cool story. But then later on down the line, the story, and this is why I really like it so much, that this whole story was really introduced to the community quite humbly. Rhys Sosby, one of the world builders, her and Jeff Grubb essentially write all the big lore stuff. She actually came onto the forums and wrote this story to us, and we as a community learnt about this from a post from a developer on the forums. It wasn't like some official blog or something in game. This is how we learnt about it, and it was just one of those very small things that we asked about. The writers suddenly opened up and said, oh yeah, no, look, there's so much to talk about here that we'd never heard of before. And it was one of those moments for me where I realised, damn, maybe we should be asking these interesting questions, because there is a good chance that the writers have got something prepared. So I'm going to read to you now, comes from the Guild Wars 2 wiki, and it's a straight up quote from Rhys Sosby when she wrote this on the forums. And it's a bit of a love story, and it's a pretty cool story, so I really wanted to share this with everyone. So here we go. When the gods arrived in Tyria, it was impossible because of their divine nature to appear before human eyes without blinding them. Thus, they decided to fetch a sculptor so that he could shape the statues in their image. When the eyes of the sculptor Malkor fell upon the face of Dwayna, his heart was instantly filled with a pure and unconditional love. It became impossible for him to turn down any of Dwayna's requests, and thus the creation of the statues was commenced. One after another, the gods presented themselves in his studio, and for each one, Malkor carved a statue in their image. Once a statue was finished, the god returned to the city of Ara, where no human could enter. So it was that Dwayna finally entered the studio of the sculptor. Malkor sublimated his art so that all the grace and beauty of the goddess radiated from his statue. And as long as he worked on the statue, it was as long as he could enjoy the infinite happiness which the presence of Dwayna gave him. Alas, then came the fateful moment when the statue was completed, and where the goddess would leave for Ara. Unable to bear the despair that grasped him when the figure of the goddess had disappeared from the horizon, he threw himself from a cliff. The place where Malkor lost his life now bears his name, the Strait of Malkor. So there you go. It's a very cool little story about how a small, seemingly at the time insignificant region of Tyria got its name, and it ties into a lot more than we really understood. We've been seeing these statues, and we've been seeing repeated human attempts at re-sculpting these things over the years, all over Guild Wars 1 for ages, and now this question that maybe we hadn't really thought to ask has been answered. Where did these statues come from? Who knew to sculpt these? And now we have the answer. I really like it, and that's just an example, I think, of a small thing that kind of points out really how deep this world can be. We can speculate about it, but I'm probably a little bit out of time. I, for example, don't really like that it's Dwayna he falls in love with, when really that's like Lyssa's territory, because she's the goddess of beauty, but we'll keep it short for today. So there you go, guys. Before we end, okay, beta weekend is coming up. I've got a bit of an opportunity for you guys, and I will for the next 3 episodes. So I do still want you to leave any questions you might have in the comment section down below, but I also would like you guys to help me choose something. I'm going to be making a lot of content for the beta here. I want to be right up there, getting as much out as I possibly can. And a part of this, I'm not going to reveal exactly what I'm doing just yet, but a part of this will mean I have one character of each race. I don't particularly care what profession these races end up. So, for today, let me know, guys, what do you want to see my human character be? Pick a profession for my human character. If you see someone's already picked it, please just thumb that up. That'll be much easier. That way I don't have to tally everything up. I'll count it all up before tomorrow's Guild Wars 2 Daily. Then I'll announce it there, and then I'll ask you for the second character. So, yeah, what profession for one of my characters in the beta? This is all footage you're going to be seeing, so pick something you want to see. But yeah, there you go, guys. Thanks very much for watching, and I guess I will see you tomorrow.